Started. Thank you so much for sitting down and meeting with me. I was just wondering if you could start by just letting us know how's it going so far with the campaign.
Oh, so great. So great. Okay, so I do have to start though with a disclaimer. My kids are at home,
Okay.
and so is my very sweet Bernedoodle. So there may be interruptions. So for those tuning in,
Yes.
they
I
get
think
to
ever
see
since the
family life.
pandemic, everyone is way more tolerant of
Oh,
interruptions on a Zoom. So,
absolutely, absolutely. Well, and today was their first day back at school. So I
hmm
have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old.
hmm
So my daughter is a teenager. And whew, say your prayers for me. She's amazing. And she's gonna be a well, she started her sophomore year today. And then I have a little guy, Luke, who's 12 and full of 12-year-old boy energy and all kinds of shenanigans happen over the summer. So I was so grateful to just send them back to the teachers who love them oh so well. So yes, but that is my disclaimer. I didn't answer
Okay.
your question. Let
No,
me
that's
answer
right.
your question.
Yeah. So, how's it going with the campaign so far?
It's good. It is going so great. I will tell you, I launched on Tuesday and then this past Sunday. Today's Monday, correct, Laura?
Today is Monday.
Here we go, day by day. So yesterday, we had my annual corn boil kickoff, and Laura, it was just so affirming to be with people who, are so excited about this campaign, who traveled all over the district to
hmm
be there. And so very excited to get going.
hmm I, we've known each other for a while, but I just wonder if you could give your a little bit of introduction for people who aren't familiar with your work.
Okay, we're 5 days into the campaign, 6 days now. I can't lose my voice.
Yeah.
I am a redhead, so I have practice making my voice heard. Also a mom, so have some practice with that too. So a little bit about my story. So I a lot of people know me, Laura, for my work in the Iowa legislature. I've been in the Iowa legislature for the last 7 years. I know we've known each other for that time.
Mhm.
And I've done a lot of work in the housing sphere and access to, prescription medications like insulin, and a lot of advocacy for everyday people, working families. But before I entered into the legislature, I was a chaplain.
Mhm.
So I am an ordained Presbyterian pastor, but I've served the bulk of my career as a chaplain on college campuses. So I am so excited to engage young people in the right in the voting process and make sure that young people have a voice as they are sending representatives to Washington. So there's a lot of colleges in this district. So I just have a special place in my heart for young people and really, really desperately want them to stay in our state and feel like that they can raise their families in the state. So that's just a little bit about my background. I'm also married 20 years in December,
Mhm.
which is wild. And then I mentioned earlier in my disclaimer that my kids are 15 and 12, and my daughter loves theater. She loves politics. My son loves every reptile under the sun, along with video games and fishing. So my world is a lot of those things day to day.
Are you going to be working as a chaplain during this campaign, or are you going to be more or less full-time campaigning when you're not at the legislature?
Full-time campaigning, and of course fulfilling my important work in the Iowa legislature. So you know me, I have a pretty strong work ethic at the Capitol early. They're very late,
Mhm.
fighting for my constituents. That will never stop. That's just who I am and how I'm wired. So I'll continue that work. And then, Laura, one of the things that I talk a lot about as I talk about my job as a chaplain, I get invited into people's most, sometimes their hardest moments in life. And that's not actually unlike being a legislator, right? I'm standing on people's doorsteps. I'm hearing about, what keeps them awake at night, the challenges that they face, the burdens that they carry. And, so I've found that there's some, connection between my work as a chaplain and my work in the Iowa legislature, showing up for people, listening deeply, and then, in the legislature, it's working to solve problems.
Do you plan to cut back at all on your work in the legislature? When your predecessor, Abby Finkenauer, when she was running for Congress, she scaled back her committee work quite a bit in the Iowa House.
Yeah, I haven't crossed that bridge yet. I intend to be as engaged as my team, wants me to be. And, I'm always all about the team. And so want to make sure that my constituents that I am tasked with taking care of have their voices heard there.
When did you start thinking seriously about running for Congress in the cycle?
Oh, Laura, welcome to the long journey of thinking through this. There were several moments, but at the end of the day, I'm running because for the last 7 years, I've stood on people's doorsteps and have heard them share about the realities they're facing in their life. And Iowans are actually making impossible choices with their lives at this moment, whether it's to pay for rent, whether it's to pay for life-saving medication. Do I pay for my utility bill? Do I buy my child a winter coat? Do I put food on the table? Or do I save for a home, right? These, to me, are impossible choices that people shouldn't have to make in the wealthiest country in the world. These are the kinds of realities that everyday people are facing. The work in the legislature and what's happening in DC is that all of the emphasis and relief, financial relief, is going to billionaires and big corporations. And Washington, D.C. needs to hear from us as Iowans what's actually happening on the ground. And so that's really what it's the accumulation of all of these stories and knowing that for me, my neighbors who I love dearly, my constituents who, talk about what keeps me awake personally at night. It's the realities and the impossible choices that my constituents are having to face because they're so stretched thin. And it's just the combination of all of that that really feels like this moment is the next faithful step, right? What it means to, fight for folks in my district on a larger level means running for the U.S. Congressional District and unseating Ashley Hinson.
And your colleague, Jennifer Converse, she stepped down as Iowa House Minority Leader to focus on the congressional campaign. And one of the reasons I was just curious about the timing was because you were seeking to be the next minority leader. So is that something that you would have been able to juggle with running for Congress, or did you start
Oh,
thinking about running for Congress later after that?
yes, yes,
Okay.
much, much later.
Okay.
So it was, it was just continuing to wrestle out. So here's where I am at, Laura. I believe deep in my soul that we are at a critical juncture in our country's life.
Mhm.
And this isn't just a political moment, it's a moral moment. And all of us should do more if we're able. And for me, it was trying to figure out how do I fit into this picture? What does it look like for me to be called into something different? And I will tell you, I had on my first day of the Iowa legislature, I had a deepening sense of call, Laura. And it was when, it was my first day. I'm being whisked around the rotunda. You're very familiar with that space. And I'm meeting the lobbyist for, the big insurance companies and the lobbyist for the big pharmaceutical companies and the lobbyist for this big corporation and that big corporation. And I start looking around and I'm like, where are the lobbyists for everyday Iowans? Where are the advocates for everyday people who are struggling to make impossible choices like, do I pay for my medication or do I pay for my rent and keep my home, right? Do I save my life or keep my home, right? These are impossible choices. And I had this deepening sense of call in the Iowa legislature that first day that was me and that was you and that is all of us who care deeply about our neighbors and who are living out Iowa values every single day, which is, we take care of one another. And no one should be pushed aside or forgotten. And so that was a deepening sense of call that I would be the loudest mouthpiece for people who were being pushed aside. And you've heard me on the floor of the Iowa House. Sometimes I get real loud and the redhead comes out and the feistiness really comes out.
Uh, in our politics, people think of pastors or ordained ministers as being on the political right.
Yes.
And so, what do you think are the misconceptions, or how do, if people are surprised that an
Yeah.
ordained pastor would be a Democrat? I mean, how would you talk about that with them?
Well, that's one of my favorite topics of conversation, actually. My husband, who teaches theology at a seminary in Dubuque, we have conversations. You can imagine our dinner table.
Mhm.
Religion and politics is the topic of the day. You can imagine my teenager and preteen in those conversations. So sometimes the parents get a good old eye roll or two at the dinner table. But part of what drives me is that right now, Ashley Hinson is being blown about by whatever advantageous political wind,
Mhm.
gives her a step further in her own aspirations and career. And I believe that Iowans are exhausted by politics and they want someone who has core convictions to actually step up and lead. And I would argue that, Laura, this race is not about me. It's not about Ashley Hinson. It's not even about Democrat or Republican, right? It's about our neighbors. And as someone who tries to live my life by the parable of the Good Samaritan every single day, which is when the powerful, walk beside someone who's struggling and look the other way, it's my faith that compels me to reach out and lend a helping hand. And I would argue that, that we don't see that kind of conviction with the voting record that Ashley Hinson has. And so I think people are really excited about someone like me who is a pastor, who is a chaplain, who lives by core convictions, because I'm not going to take orders from party leaders, right? I'm not going to take orders or be pushed around by political winds. I feel deeply called to take care of my neighbor. And I believe that that is what it means to live a life that is good and right and just, is to make sure that we are leaving no one behind. And so I'm hopeful that people will see that.
Before you formally launched your campaign, the Hinson campaign was out with a statement calling you a leftist lunatic and Iowa's AOC and so on. So I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that.
Yes, yes. Well, first of all, I think, it's extremely disappointing to see that kind of attack. I think it's exactly why Iowans are so exhausted by politics. I don't see things like taking care of your neighbor, our seniors, our veterans, our kids is a lunatic idea. I
Mhm.
believe that's the right thing to do. And so, I am a feisty redhead who will continue to fight for that, and ignore the political partisan banter, because really at the end of the day, that's Iowans are just absolutely exhausted by that. And I'm showing up for what really matters. It's people's lives and it's the future of our state, right? I want my kids to grow a beautiful life and family here. And I want to retire in this state as a senior and,
Mhm.
have the kind of things that help me live my best life, like affordable healthcare and affordable housing. Knowing that my kids have economic opportunities and childcare, and they themselves can buy into a housing market. Most people want to be left alone to live their life that they believe that they deserve and build the life that they know their kids deserve. And I want to fight for that.
And speaking of fighting,
Yes.
I I feel like one of the main fault lines in Democratic circles this year is how to confront the Trump administration. What should Democrats in Congress be doing? There were a lot of people who were very upset at the Democratic senators who voted for the budget deal, the continuing spending resolution in March to keep the government open. It looks like we're probably headed for another cliffhanger. How would you approach that kind of situation? Do you think that sometimes the Democrats in Congress should maybe even go to the mat, even if it leads to a federal government shutdown? Or do you think it's paramount to avoid a federal government shutdown? And how would you view that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, I will tell you that I exhibited a lot of work in the Iowa legislature where, we come to these critical impasses. And for me, as a chaplain, it's all about bringing people together across difference and doing what is good and right and just for all people. That is a core principle for me, and that is how I work to live my life, but also to lead in, political tensions. I would argue that I am someone who has worked across the aisle with anyone who wants to fight for Iowans. But Laura, I am a redhead, right? And I am not afraid of a fight. In fact, part of my faith commitments is speaking truth, naming the realities that everyday Iowans are facing, and I'm not afraid to do that, and I'm not afraid to take on those big fights. And I do think that there are times when that it requires for us to go all out, and then there's times when we work really hard to bring people together across difference. So can I speak to a government shutdown? Certainly once I'm there and I have the full context in front of me, I think I'll know. And I will continue just to lead out of the principle of doing everything I can to bring people together across difference, and speaking out and fighting for everyday working families in our state.
Northeast Iowa, it's a swingy area. It used to be fairly Democratic. I mean, it used to be that a district that included Cedar Rapids and Dubuque and Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and Mason City, people would think that's highly Democratic. This is a district that voted for Trump a couple of times, most recently by 10 points. So, how can a Democrat win a district that voted for Donald Trump by a considerable margin?
Yes. So I have a two-part answer for you, Laura. So if you'll bear with me. So I first campaign ever, I'm out knocking doors in the city of Dubuque, and I see a guy roll up in his minivan, and I'm supposed to go knock on his door, and he comes out of his minivan with his kids, and clearly, they've been on the soccer field. He's been coaching the kids. And he sees me, Laura, come up, and I'm, a new candidate, and bright-eyed and ready to go. And he sees me coming, and he puts his hand out and he says, "No, no, 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 no. If you're a Democrat, I don't want to have anything to do with you." And I was a little taken aback, but I said, "Oh, okay, okay. Here's my card. My cell phone is on my card. If I become your state representative and you ever need anything, I want to help. Please call me." And then I kind of smirked and I said, "And please call me if you just want to set me straight." And he actually perked up when I said that, and he said, "Okay, well, let me just set you straight right now, right here." And he started to share with me about his life, and he had worked 2 to 3 jobs in his life. He was working in manufacturing, paycheck to paycheck, feeling like he was working harder than ever and barely getting by. And then kids came into the picture. And what he shared with me was so, deeply distressing. He felt like he couldn't build the kind of life he knew his kids deserved. And so we talked about, for him, what was financial security? What would that kind of life look like? And he said this. He said, "Lindsay, being able to afford Happy Joe's Pizza twice a year for both of my kids' birthdays." Mm-hmm. That was what financial security looked like for him. That's why, he was so broken up and disillusioned by politics. And by the end of that conversation, that conversation will never leave me. It's shaped how I see this part of the state in particular. As I left, he said, "I may never vote for you." And he said, "But if you ever need like a bodyguard, you just let me know. I would show up for you and make sure that, you have the space to say what it is that you say." And, that was such a compliment to me, right? Because here it was someone so disillusioned by politics and politicians who just wants someone to show up for them. And then by the end of that conversation, and he was a Republican, by the end of that conversation, he didn't give me a vote commitment, but he said he would show up for me if I ever needed it. And I will tell you, Laura, I think that folks in Iowa's second congressional district are making impossible choices That is the reason why they are looking for people who will fight for them and, and change the system, right? It's working right now for a privileged few only, right? And Ashley Hinson is doing everything she possibly can to reward billionaires and special interests. Iowans need people who will fight for them and who will put aside the political games. And that is, what I intend to do in this. So I do think that folks will start to realize that Hinson has lost her way. They'll start to see her for who she truly is. And I will be standing right there with my fiery redhead, saying things like, no one should ever have to make these kinds of impossible choices in a country like ours, and never in Iowa, right? When we love our neighbors and believe in each other.
Can we talk a little bit about Dubuque? Because this used to be, for most of my life, I mean, the most solidly Democratic county in
Yep.
Iowa, or one of them. And when Dubuque voted for Donald Trump in 2016, I thought it was a fluke. Many people thought it was a fluke. Now, three times the county has voted for Trump. Ashley Hinson has carried the county as well. Why do you think that has happened, and how could you start turning that around?
Yeah. So I do think it's having these conversations with folks who are disillusioned. And I would argue that the reason why we have seen this district flip back and forth, right? This is Iowa's second congressional district, has seen a lot of that, from Abby Finkenauer in 2018, and then to Ashley Hinson. And, Abby flipped that seat prior to being in Congress. So, I mean, it is a district that has shifted a lot. And I think it's because it's a district that is really, truly struggling to get by. I mean, people working harder than ever who are absolutely stretched thin. And when you talk about everyday economic realities, folks start to light up, right? And I think that right, I am someone who also, works really hard in my life, who has, we have a two-parent working household, right? I feel concerned about things like, are we saving enough so that our kids have what they need? Are we, can we afford the soccer gear or the baseball gear, or, and I think that folks, right, like there is something about standing on their porch and being invited into that conversation and having that in a genuine way that changes folks and shapes folks. And so I truly believe that this district is absolutely a winnable district for Democrats, 100%. And it's going to take a lot of grit and a lot of big-hearted conversations, but I am ready for it.
How many counties have you visited so far in the district? The
Gosh,
22,
yes.
roughly.
Well, Laura, I don't know, since I've launched just 5 days ago. But I will tell you that I have traveled this congressional district for the last 7 years.
Okay.
So, right, because part of my role in the Iowa House Democrats and the leadership role that I've had, I'm helping elect Democratic candidates from different parts of the district. And I am so proud, Laura. We're going to start rolling out a whole bunch of endorsements coming your way very soon. But it's because, I've worked with folks across this district for the last 7 years, and I've showed up for them. I've knocked their doors, to help them win. We've had some wins, we've had some losses, but gosh, Laura, for me, it's just all about showing up. And I've been really, proud. I hope you've seen some of the pictures on social media of the corn boil. We had over 200 people packed into a small space, showing up for me. And gosh, I stood up at the mic and I got so overwhelmed in that moment. And I had to fight back tears because it just, right, there's something about Iowa family, right? We are all family who care about our neighbors. And that room, Laura, it was Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And that's how we win this district back.
I think you started to answer this question already, but I'll just ask it in a slightly different way. Looks like there are going to be at least three, if not four candidates in this primary. What do you say to voters who say, hey, I like all of these Democrats. Why should they vote for you
They
next June?
Yeah, they should like all of us Democrats. In fact, I have to tell you, it's always an honor to be in a Democratic primary. It's to be really honest and frank with you all, it's miserable for the candidate because, you're like, I love that person so much, and I have to tell you, when I ran in a very competitive primary for this Iowa House seat, and I ran against a man named Brad Kavanaugh, who we had not met when we ran. And then we ran for a year and a half against each other. Well, a year of the primary and then
Hmm.
6 months for the general. But over that course of that year, it was hard. Um, and at the end of it, and we have become very, very good friends. And now he's the Dubuque mayor.
Hmm.
And so I am a person that believes that, when all of us take the next faithful step, right? Doors open and we just don't know what they're going to be. I believe deeply that I am absolutely the best candidate to unseat Ashley Hinson. I think I will tell you that when you just look at the two of us, I think that I show a very significant contrast as someone who cares deeply for my neighbors and who lives out of faith commitments and deeply held convictions, and that I will always lead from that place. So I think that I'm the best person for a contrast. I also think that I have a fierce work ethic. I'm not afraid, and this I've served in the Iowa legislature for 7 years. I know her talking points in and out. I know the policies that she's voted for and voted against, and I am ready to call her out on harming everyday people.
Is there anything I didn't ask that you think would be important for my readers to know, either about you or about your campaign?
Yeah. So there's one other piece that I think is really important. I have championed mobile home residents for a number of years in the Iowa legislature. Um, People who live in mobile homes are often seniors and veterans, single moms, and they have chosen a, a fiscally responsible way of living by buying a mobile home unit, which is, traditionally cheaper than a house.
Hmm.
But part of that is they purchase their unit, but they don't own the land that the
Hmm.
unit sits on. And we have seen over the course of the last 7 years these private equity firms and out-of-state corporations buying up mobile home parks. They own the land and they start price gouging residents out of their homes. And I had a gentleman say to me that he was having to make the choice: do I pay for the increase in my rent and keep my mobile home, or do I pay for my insulin medication and keep my foot?
Hmm.
These are impossible choices that everyday people are making because Ashley Hinson has been promoting special interests and putting all kinds of financial relief to billionaires and giving tax breaks to big corporations. It's time for us to come together and fight for our neighbors and make sure that folks don't have to make these kind of impossible choices. I'm committed to lifting up those stories and fighting for everyday Iowans.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Yes, it's so enjoyable always, Laura. Thank you for having me on.